So welcome to our debate of the first session. Thank you very much all for your interesting lectures, for the topics covered by them, and for the lights that you provide on the mother of the matter at the age of computation. Also, we can allow some questions from the public. Perhaps now we can see if every one of you have some opinions, some short comments of each of you. So if every one of you can explain in a very short contribution what have you seen in the other two lectures. This can be one question to understand that it's a debate, that not a prolongation of our own lecture. And also, I am interested about what is really the reason or the intention, the authentic background, kind of what is the ontological reason, if we can speak in this way, almost the secret essence or the spark, the real reason to choose the uses that you have developed in your own lecture. What is, if you can synthesize in few words, your first worries of now? What is the foreground on your heads? So perhaps Justin, Carmen, Bob, if you can explain something about the other lectures, what do you think about the other lectures, and what is in your mind for now?
I'll have a go. I was really respond to Justin's comment that we've almost got too many materials, kind of as a thought. That there's also the notion that we have too many tools, and I don't think that's, I don't mean that's negative, but I think we operate now in a context that there is an enormous kind of availability of avenues to take, which for me, reinforce, the need for collaborative practice, the need for collaborative research around the world of the material science, because of so much of it now is about operating within domains that we cannot see. You're operating in worlds that we cannot see, and as you can pick up in my talk, I'm interested in that in a different way too. But this thing about maximum, it's not, the thing that I think is the agenda in research and education now is to shift away from learning tools to evaluating them. So, one major shift that I see reinforced by the talks that we're putting together back in London is changing the way in which computing is taught completely. And getting it away from introducing students to programs and just introducing them to geometry and materials and evaluating the tools to kind of get you from one to another. The bit that I think we strikes me and was very loaded in the first talk is how designers can engage at a very early stage with your world, Justin. And one question I'd have for you is, what extent do you see the platform for collaboration opening up in your work? At the very early stages, as opposed to, say, the later stages when designers and, say, engineers conventionally come together when an issue has been resolved. Can you envision a new discipline emerging here in a university, an entirely new discipline which is somehow a hybrid of design and material science?
Okay, thank you for the question. I'll try to answer quickly. I agree with everything you say. I actually work a lot with designers and architects, even though I haven't showed you everything I wanted to. But when it comes to architectural materials, I have no intuition of anything. You may have observed that already. So I have to look to other fields to get ideas of what we could actually do with those micro architectural materials, and it's definitely something that take up a new interest in those fields. I mean, design and architecture, and I don't know if it's a whole new field, a whole new discipline, but it's definitely different from the usual approach in material science. So I don't know. I don't know if I can say anything more about that, but it's definitely something new and very exciting for all the people involved.
But for example, when now comes someone and gives you very much money for research in materials,
That doesn't happen a lot.
What do you do?
Okay.
Very much money.
I've never had this question before, so I guess at first I will buy a very big computer, and then a very big 3D printer, and then hire an army of PhD students to do the work. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I'm a young researcher, so I actually haven't thought a lot about what I would do if someone gave me 5 million euros or something. But I'm mostly interested in efficiency in materials, and not necessarily making very new material with like carbon fibers and stuff like that are very expensive, not only in terms of money but in terms of carbon. I mean, carbon emissions. But, I would probably try to work on mechanical efficiency, since I have kind of a mechanical background. And I'm thinking those kind of structures can be of interest for other fields, like for architects, for engineers in general. But maybe you can add something.
Some consideration.
General consideration. For me, the casual sequence of the three reports are very interesting for me, because we have begin with the material in general, with your report, and I talk about one material in particular, and at the end you have the realization of all typology of material. So and me too, at the end of my report, I ask about what is today, what is our future in a rupture respect yesterday, or in continuity, or that. No? In particular, you have give some answer to this question. But this for me one of important one of topic. The realization of reality, because reality is a physical thing, is subject to the gravity. So we have seen the reality is immaterial, so no more subject to gravity, to physical logic. So I think changing the nature of human in sense of anthropological, I think. That influence also the memory, for example, because the memory is organic. And so the past is related, referred to historical, material, physical, object, material, concrete, etc., etc. So we have to reflect about the inorganic memory, analogical, non-analogical, but contrary, digital, technological memory. So it's a question, philosophical question, I think, that have some consequence in form, in shape, or point of view aesthetic. I'm very interested to aesthetic, but as non-technical aspect. This is very interesting, this Congress, because meet together technical data, statistic, formal in critical interpretation, all in reading multidisciplinary, multi-scale, multimedia. This is very interesting for me because I'm architect with the shape, form, material, etc. But could be a risk, be only architect, to think to resolve all problematic without no other aspect. So for me, the question of aesthetics is the synthesis of all these elements. For me, it has been very interesting, for example, but also overall your lecture of reality, Lars von Trier. Do you like Lars von Trier, the filmmaker? Because this is a post-human reality, is black and white, is very terrifying, but it's true. It's very interesting for me, reflects as architect. So I have the impression to talk about of another world, or past world, probably, I don't know. This is a problem, this is my crisis in this moment. And Zirconia is the name of a similar, fantastic city of Italo Calvino. Zinconia, Zirconia, your Zirconia. In effect, the world of fantastic, of imagination you have in each age. This is our safety. So, no, probably. So, this is the first consideration after the three relationship. Me too, because I reading my lecture in function Europe, probably I change something. This is a good effect of this Congress, because I stay here. I say before, I'm working on the 5th volume about concrete, but it's concrete future and matter in the making. So something changed, I think. And probably the focus is exactly in the chemical, atomic, form work. The form work is superato, is over by printing, etc. But a point of view of atomical consistence, for me it's very interesting to investigate in which way the atomical consistence of a patent, because concrete is a patent, so it's no material, common material is a patent, so in changing continuous. And investigate the relationship between the chemical, atomic composition until the final shape, or in which way the intuition of architect or engineer could be influenced from the continuous transformation of a patent. Because this is another question, no material, physical material as steel, iron is fixed, but a patent that could be transformed completely. We have respected the Roman, that is very simple concrete, etc. So that for me is a question, and this Congress is useful for me for reflect.
For your 5th volume, at the end, concrete is an additive material. So an architect needs some definitive material for our 3D printers. So concrete is perhaps a kind of concrete, that can be for huge 3D printers that all the architects are waiting, because at the end, I think the title of our event is like I say at the beginning, it's something that is in the air. We have so much freedom and creativity, and that at the end the difficulty is to make real things. But architects want to do the real things, not only to dream. No? But engineers don't solve our needs. So now we are in a situation that it's contrary like the 19th century. 19th century architects was thinking in Greek architecture or historicist architecture, and engineers were forward. And now architects are dreaming in cities, in buildings that engineers don't make for us, the machines. So architects begin to work with robots. Why architects are now interested with robots? Because engineers are working for us. We need these machines that can build our dreams. What do you think, Rob?
I can add to that. Since I worked with architects, I can assure you that architects are way in advance compared to engineers. And actually, I think engineering lacks a lot of innovation, because we are living on the, at least in some Western European economies, we are living on the past, and the great 60s or the great 70s, where at least, okay, I'm talking about French engineering. But the Concorde, the nuclear plants and stuff like that, the TGV, okay. But those things are 30, 40, 50 years old, and there's not been a lot of innovation in that field since then. And we are living on that, and that's probably why there's not a lot to expect from engineers, and that's an engineer saying that. So that's also why I go work with architects, because I know that, maybe I'm not the typical engineer because I dream, and that's why, I'm trying to work with architects, because they get things done, which is what you would expect from an engineer, but I can assure you I don't know, they do it. Maybe, I'm sure you can say it.
Yeah, just picking up on machines that build our dreams, as a thought. It just strikes me back to the notion of saturation of tools and materials kind of world, that for me, certainly the most powerful kind of condition that we're kind of riding through right now is one of enormous potential. I think we're proving that point over and over again, that there is a huge amount of potential going on in the world of experimentation, research and so on. But I think the questions that remain to be more important than coming up with, say, what to do with a robot, are the issues that challenge who might want to call themselves an architect. How one defines that. It strikes me the social and cultural questions that are surrounding all of this kind of evolution remain kind of under discussed, in comparison. And the questions that come out of the notion of distributed technologies, mass production in the sense that the masses are producing unique things, the notion that cities become, enormously dense micro factories, where the notion of how to make and how to build is taken for granted as much as it is to know how to log on to the internet, so to speak. I think these are perhaps the range of issues that ought to inform how we go about building practice, how we go about building collaborative teams, and how we go about building schools. And the thing that I think, if I'm honest, the projects that I've done in the past, where I've always presented them as collaborative, they haven't, they're collaborative with like-minded individuals, to be honest about it. They are collaborative with individuals that I know are bringing things to the table that we are probably going to agree on. But it's the collaborative projects where you're taking far greater risks that perhaps, are the projects that we should be doing now. And in that regard, I think the social and cultural set of questions are very, very important to start to explore, but also our relationship with industry, at the other end of the scale. So one of the things that seems to me to be emerging now is that universities are changing their role in relation to what's outside the campus wall, so to speak. That it's far more important it seems to me that universities address that threshold than they did before. And they have the means to offer space to take risks, offer environments in which questions become enriched and developed and then pass through different environments, such as material science, computer science, cultural, theoretical design, and so forth. So, I think the thing that what's the matter, that's the question. The matter is perhaps one of engagement, of getting us beyond the potential and start to engaging with social, cultural, and industrial kind of sets of issues. Because in some ways, with the numbers of people involved in the planet right now, they outweigh everything here, by an enormous degree. And I think that would be fascinating to start to make architectural discourse something which is everyday in that sense.
Another aspect that you said before is the relationship between architect and engineer. I think is no exist the difference between architect and engineer. I think the project is a synthesis of a different discipline, but not only architect and engineer, but also technology and etc. And the aesthetic is the result of this aspect, the synthesis of these aspects. So this morning Maria told the reporter talk about beauty. So this is another question, I think, a topic of this Congress. What is the beauty after the Congress, after our report? Change the concept of beauty or is the same? Probably the beauty is perfect. For me, no. Beauty is imperfect. And the beauty is true, probably, as Nervi said. But Morandi, for example, said the static choose are many, but the final choose is artistic, is one fact artistic. So the art, the visionary art. What is the role in this process? To go. So in this sense, we have continue mixed the aspect because the specialized one and in probably go towards and final solution not so good. And for I look at project as the synthesis of also of social requirement, because this is another question. What is the final client destinatario, vorrei dire, client of these projects? What is the role in the construction of the world? And without ambition, because the architects don't save the world, the people, but could be have a good contribution.
Well,
so
if you
one,
analyze,
I think this is another goal of this Congress.
Mm-hmm. Well, in the approach of beauty or of understanding, of analyzing forms or interpreting, how to interpret it, what we see now, when we see some architecture that is very suggestive, we can see perhaps in two ways. From one side is something that is apparently casual from Dadaism, that comes from Dadaism, or that is the values of matter that comes from informalism, but at the same time in a computational digital organicism, images that are suggestive from surrealism. So these two ways now I think are displaying the approach of today to beauty or to give suggestions. It's interesting the references that Bob have in some courses. I have read something. And for example, when Theo Jansen makes that his machines moves because the wind, no? And the Gentinelli because the water, no? So we have two elements, wind, water, and perhaps Stellarchis because the fire of his pain in the body, no? So we have the three elements, but are external forces that produce a kind of automatic harmony. But at the end, the fourth element comes from the earth, comes from biology, comes from life, comes from DNA, that are also internal forces that are arranging some harmony, some beauty. You know? So what is, and also saying now the movement of art to biology, and also some architects speaking about biology myself, sorry. But what is your position with biology like mother of future also, no?
Okay. Well, I will start with the obvious, biomimicry, biomimetism.
Are very different aspects, no?
Okay, but I will talk about what I know, which is material science, and we definitely we work with biologists. Because nature has been, making very multi-scale architectured material for billions of years, with basically no energy, no heat, just water and accretion of minerals. And nowadays we try to make very advanced material just to try to get where nature was a long time ago, and we still can't. For instance. If you look at shellfish and stuff like that, clearly we cannot reproduce the spatial arrangement of the multi-scale, multi-layer structures that happens in nature. But still, that's a huge source of inspiration for material scientists. That's about all I can say for material science. So, yes.
I'm a bit reluctant to go into the question too deeply because I know there are people in the room who are far more qualified to answer it. But what I would say, though, is I think the question about that entire world is that it opens up and reinforces the notion that the architecture doesn't reside in the object; it's in the behaviour, of the system. And I think that's without a question, a deep and long-standing issue in challenging the architectural outcome. And I think back to my interest in exploring new disciplines, it strikes me that at some point very soon we ought to challenge the notion that education is for a general kind of rounded product. There's a potential in architectural education to achieve roundedness at a certain point, but then to go into deep research in a particular avenue, out of which that can come back and contribute to the origin, but also to the way in which a new set of arrangements and teams might be constructed. And this is definitely one field. How do you introduce a wet lab into a school of architecture, which we're doing right now, when a very, very sophisticated one already exists in the university, run by a very different community of people who look upon it in an entirely different way. And I think one of the first steps is cultural. It's just the notion of having a wet lab in a studio, and it will be literally bang in the middle of a studio, next to students making models of cities, or making animations or drawing, it's like the first year projects, drawing buildings, making physical models out of cars, seems to me just to enrich the notion that architecture, is a set of questions that permeate all sorts of different processes. But we're not going to pull out of our wet lab experts in that field. We're going to pull out of that wet lab people who can evaluate their role in an expert field, and I think that's for me the importance of it.
Another question for...
You speak, for example, about bioconcrete. no? Or-
No, no. We talk about exceptional objects or exceptional research. I think in which way we can transfer this exceptional research object situation in ordinary ordinary environmental or city. And in the second question is, we don't talk about the city. We talk about a singular object, a situation. It's a very important research, singular research, but on the other hand, in which way that could influence the planning of the city, for example, in sense of not only as urbanistic or architect, but in sense of administrator and process of planning of the city. In which way change the city and in sense of completely changing respect to the idea of formal city of the past? Probably yes. No, the megalopoly or metropoli of southeast of Asia demonstrated that this detachment from projection towards the future, detachment respect of his history, but his also idea of matter of the city. So this is two considerations that we have to introduce in this our Congress, I think. So the transfer to exceptional of the research, because the research is always exceptional, no? Per definition, for definition, se non lo è, if don't exceptional, because find a thing that before don't exist. So in this sense, no? In this sense, it's exceptional, non-ordinary. So transfer the exceptional to ordinary into the common people, no? In which way become a common ground? Ultimately is separated, no? Is fantastic, but separated. And in other way, in which way can be influenced the planning of the city? So could be sustainable in sense of don't compromise the future, but do better. This is another, I think, question.
Okay, perhaps we have some minutes for questions, no? Cass? For me? I am not speaker. I speak very bad.
Well, this may be helpful. Just to know, what in this room, this entire room, would you consider as biological?
What?
What inside this room would you consider as biological?
Biological, okay. Well, let me think if this is a question with... well, I am working with biology like matter. So your DNA is biology for me, and I can work with your DNA like matter for do a room.
Can I add something from a matter science point of view?
What?
Can I add something to that?
Okay.
It's okay. It's an itchy answer, but for me, DNA is it's mostly mineral because it's only discrete molecules. I mean proteins put together. But the biological comes from the output of DNA, which I mean I'm no philosopher or biologist, but from a material science point of view, it's just a polymer chain,
Yeah,
which has nothing.
If you consider DNA like matter, with the advantage that it's the emergence, that is the replicancy, the possibilities that this curious, mysterious order of molecules gives to you. If you change the order, you have nothing. You know? If you have exactly this order, you have some advantages that architects can use for build spaces, this room. You know? So how can biology extend to architecture? Not in the way of biomimicry. That is, it's only imitation. In the way of the internal forces that biology gives to you. But okay, the question is that in different ways is defined the same from different approaches, that it's only a question sometimes of use the words in a precise way. You know? What you will answer about this question? I am interested in your answer.
Well, my answer would be quite provocative, because I would say everything in this room is just as biological as the specific examples that you would specify as biological. Or in other words, don't disassemble yourself from everything that is around you. It's just as biological as you are.
Yeah.
Actually, that's my statement.
Okay, but we need to be precise in definitions. No? So, so much bigger or huge is your understanding of one word. We lost precision. No? If you precise biology is only in one sense, because now it's very common to say bioarchitecture to things that it's not bioarchitecture.
What I'm saying is that this desk you are sitting at is bioarchitecture. That's what I'm saying.
In one sense, perhaps, but in a too big sense. If you precise that biology is what you can explain about something that is alive. When it's dead, it was biology. Now it's not more. Is not more a matter that can continues in the replicancy, in the emergence. He loses the properties of emergence, of replicancy. No? That for architects is a very important possibilities to use this.
I just wanted to add
1 and 2 and 3.
just a comment on the
But
current.
perhaps not so much to me, it's the speakers and
Just
the
to-
invited. Sorry.
Just to add a comment on the current conversation right now. I mean, I would say that the most, from the point of view of material science and engineering, the most interesting biological things in this room is our bodies, not our DNA, but our bodies as load-bearing structures, right? So we have bones bearing loads in compression, we have muscles bearing loads in tension, then we have the connectivity materials like tendon, which connects bone to muscle, cartilage, which connects bone to bone, and it is from that macro material aspect, not so much from the DNA aspect, that we can learn a lot. Right? Bone has properties like self-healing, it functions while it grows. Try to get a regular material to do that. You know, you go from a baby that's 2 years old or 1 year old with all the articulations in place, you can grow into an adult and those articulations stay in place. That's an amazing thing to happen, right? Then we have muscles, which are basically, each one is an engine, each one is a fuel cell, right? So we are made out of engines, but at the same time they are just jelly. They're just you know, a liquid in which solid particles are suspended, right? But it's a smart jelly, right? That can contract, and then if you pair muscles like the biceps and the triceps in opposite direction, now they can push and pull. It is by studying those solutions to actual load-bearing problems in nature, right, which of course do not exhaust the human body. We still have a circulatory system, we have a nervous system, we have a respiratory system and so on, but none of those contribute really to the architectural part, so to speak. Well, at least not directly. And so the most directly involved materials are materials that are pretty magical. And we are made out of them, and every vertebrate is made out of them. And we certainly have plenty to learn about how we create new materials from those materials that have been created before.
Ezio?
You're completely right. And that's what we are trying to do with architectured materials.
That makes it interesting because I completely disagree. You agree with me, you agree with me, I disagree with him.
But once again, I'm not talking about architecture, so I think I'm safe.
This is, I mean, far from a statement. I just wanted to see if I could help the conversation. It seemed to me that, and again, I'm kind of more intrigued to the material science, not being a material scientist. It seemed to me that when you're talking about, let's say, material archetypes or particular type of geometries, there was not a clear reference, but there was, at least to my mind, an attachment to a particular scale of operation. And that brings up, of course, questions about biology and at which scale does it operate, both in space and in time, right? So then the question is there a particular scale for geometry? Or what happens in your blank holes where materials we don't quite know? Is it actually the transposition of scale, both maybe in space or in time, that allows for a different view of what biological is? I mean, that's a question for Pano.
So the thing is, we are constrained by our means of production, right? And nowadays, okay, we have 3D printers, but basically we can build stuff that are like 10 centimeters wide and 1 millimeter thick at best. I'm talking about going smaller and smaller. Okay, if you get more money, you can get a stereolithography apparatus, and okay, then you can do something. But then you are limited because you can only use thermosetting polymers. So you are shrinking the whole material space to a very specific one that is one family that is very pollutant and very expensive. So that's probably not the best solution. But I mean, we are working on that, and the aim is obviously to intricate the scales, like in the human body, in a bone, and you know, to get as less. I mean, okay, less is more, you know.
Nothing is better.
Less material and the best mechanical property, because we are doing structures, so we want to do structural engineering in a microstructural world. So that's the aim. Thank you for your question.
There was a question there, and after there, first there, yes? Yes? No?
I can just speak my question without this. I hate this. I have a loud voice. So just by way of jogging the discussion forward, I have a question about, again, materials, how they used to be and potentially where we're going with them. For the longest time, I think we used to think of materials as a cladding item, something that came after the fact. Because structurally, we always knew that it was going to be either concrete, steel, or wood, or maybe one other material, and that's it. So materials were always to the extent of some coming after the fact, cladding or clothing something. And I wonder if you think that through the age of computation that might be changing, that material, that structure might be now entering a new phase and becoming as material as the materials that we used to speak of as cladding. Something other than the 3 or 4 ones that we traditionally went with.
May I kind of interrupt? Could you mention your name and you don't transcribe this discussion so that we have the names of the audience?
Microphone?
Even microphone, we all think it's recorded.
Oh, okay.
Just
Just my name?
I remember Adrio, but then I was
The police needs to know. My name is Ayad. Last name is Ramani. And I'm from Washington State University. You want my age? I have 2 children. Social security number.
Better, yes.
You will not be recorded, that's all. You don't want to speak to the microphone.
I don't know if the question was directed at me or not, but there's a few things I want to say about your question. And one is, I don't know who you're speaking for, because I think, for every time somebody says, we tend to think of things after, you'll always find someone who thinks the opposite. I don't think it's true to say that it's always been the case that we think of materials after, or it's kind of a cladding. I think there's plenty of examples of it being approached as a primary source in design. I think, in actual fact, I'd say we're going more in the direction of losing that connectivity in one sense, but in another sense, getting into a very interesting territory, picking up on the question of scale, of exploring things we can't see. I've said it again, of looking at behaviors and using tools that give us information towards a material that physically might be beside us, but we can't see the changes we're making because it's not possible to see with the naked eye. So what's really radically changed is that we're operating in a scale of information which changes, in a sense, how we're formulating our decisions. And I think that necessitates a much broader laboratory of interests in forming that discussion. So I think there's something, perverse about architectural, education and practice in its relationship to materials, and it kind of always has been in a general sense. But there's something quite profoundly, a revolutionary before us right now in changing the way we might go about it in the future because of these tools. They might actually, new technologies, for me, are more profoundly opening up new readings of old materials, rather than progressing towards new materials all the time. I find new technologies ways of re-engaging with processes and skills, which we haven't talked about very much, in a sense far more interesting often than thinking, I've got to specify the next new material. A lot of the time it's about looking at a very ancient material and thinking about how I might attempt to replicate the way in which it was made 1,000 years ago. And I might find that I'm, flawed in my attempts. I might find that somebody from 1,000 years ago had more skills than I have now. So I think that's what's interesting right now. It's not simple, And again, obviously through my position and interest in education, I'm interested in changing the kind of chemistry of the learning environment, so that the debate doesn't return to a conventional platform that we decide as architecture. I think that's, for me, a way of answering a question.
Thank you.
Thanks. My name is Mania. My surname is Maybody. I'm from KTH School of Architecture in Stockholm. I have a question for Justin, and probably if Bob could contextualize it in architecture. When you presented, you've been having material in your presentation. In your field, when do you start coining the word matter, and when do you start using the word material? And in relation to design process, then if Bob could collaborate on that, how do we actually, throughout design process, use these words like moving from matter to material and in the scale matter and so on?
Okay.
Thanks.
It's going to be a short answer. So in material science, we never talk about matter. We only talk about materials. And I discovered the word materiality when I met architects. I actually didn't know what they were talking about, And actually, my first talk to architects was, okay, can you make a talk about materiality? And of course, I didn't want to look bad, so I said, yeah, definitely, I will do that. And then I had to look it up. And then I understood that what architects think when they talk about materiality. And that's actually, I think architects think way more about the way to make material and process them and use them than actual material scientists. Because when you are doing material science, maybe you are working on processing of materials. Well, if you do that, usually you don't work on characterizing their properties or or formulating polymers or stuff like that. It's not something new, but in science, if you want to publish and succeed, you have to go to a very narrow field and be, one of the 5 people on Earth doing that, so, you're safe. While being an architect, you have to deal with different kind of materials, and you have to actually, process them. I mean, okay, maybe not the architects, but they have to think about that, how to bring the material to the construction site, how the material will live during the life of the building, how, all the problems of durability that are often above the heads of material scientists, except the one working on durability. So, okay, short answer.
I think knowledge is documented in different ways, and so there's no true way of really tapping into knowledge and then just picking up the information and running off with it. And for architects, particularly around the world of materiality and construction, fabrication and making and craft, I think the issue that's very most clearly before us right now is that the world of which we've relied upon for certainly the last 150 years or 100 and 200 years has been largely large parts of its critical nature have been undocumented. They've just been acquired through tacit knowledge. So, over the last 200 years at least, and obviously much further back than that as well, the delivery, the production of design has relied on a huge human database of tacit knowledge, which is undocumented. It is just in the hands and in the minds of the people who make it with us. And I think that's, to me, what I see when I go, around looking at stuff at conferences or workshops and so on, being made by robots, which is wonderful. We've got 11 of them now ourselves. But, I look at the stuff and I go, I know people who could make that same object better, without this tool. And I think we need to address that issue about how, right now, at a critical point where there's a generation kind of coming up to their retirement, literally. We employ some of them in our own workshops who are in their late 50s and 60s, who know stuff that nobody is learning right now. And we have to, get them involved in the, development and crafting of these new technologies. And, I just go back to the reference mentioned before in Kurt Vonnegut's Player Piano book, this story of the Turner who goes back to see his own work being replicated after his retirement, and all he can see are faults because he tried to make everyone better than the last.
Are you hungry? Are you hungry? No?
I think
Perhaps the last question, and
so maybe
perhaps...
I should hand it to Manuel, or can I add one more thing and then I leave it to you, or can I? Yeah. What is then like we have this word material matter, and then also when it comes to computation, now I'm extending it a bit to virtual. Do you personally agree that some of our writers coin the scripting and like point clouds and those data as material, and how would that be confusing throughout, not confusing, but for like design processes, and then when you want to define things, when the script become material and the material is material, and you do artifact and you do physical, artifact become digital and digital become physical, then how do you defer these things to describe design processes, let's say if you're writing such a thing? Do you personally agree of calling a script or data of that one used to generate computational form, let's say, material also? And then I to Manuel.
Yeah, I do. I thought I'd give a short answer for a change.
Go ahead. Oh, who's talking now? Whose turn? Well, first of all, I'll get back to that in a second. I just wanted to add something that Bob quite rightly just remarked about skills. Because when we talk about materials, we need to also talk about the human body that interacts and affects those materials, right? It is not just the fact that we have all these new materials, and unfortunately philosophers tend to think of knowledge as being representational knowledge only, linguistic knowledge, knowing that the hydrogen atom has only one proton, or knowing that Columbus discovered America in 1492, right? That's the kind of knowledge that's transmitted through books, it's transmitted through lectures. On the other hand, there is the kind of knowledge that is transmitted by example, knowing how to swim, knowing how to ride a bicycle, knowing how to do carpentry, knowing how to do metallurgy, knowing how to design, which is taught by example and then learned by doing and practicing. And you get better at it as the more you practice. Right? It's an entirely different mode of transmission, right? Which philosophers have ignored for the longest time. Today we have expressions like know-how by Gilbert Ryle, or tacit knowledge by, what was his name? I'll come up with a name in a second. But those are 20th century philosophers that kind of, at the last minute, began adding this thing. We really need to develop a more elaborate philosophy about the human body as a material entity that doesn't just represent things, that intervenes in the world, in this world of new materials, right? Because you can produce a brand new material, and 10 different craftsmen with 10 different approaches and sets of skills are going to come up with incredible different things out of one and the same material. Right? So it's the coupling of the two that really matters.
I agree with all of that, obviously. I think there's another thing to say here, is we're not all the same. It's not just about learning by trial and error. I do think some people have propensities to be good at some things more than others. Like, I'm crap at woodwork. I've just tried over and over again, but I just can't get there. But with metalwork, I'm okay, and there's something about me that I respond to metalwork better than woodwork. I've explained it through drawing. I mean, I didn't learn how to make anything till I was about 20, but I was drawing from, as soon as I could walk sort of stage. And so I found metalwork much easier to grasp as a fabrication process through my background in drawing, because I just saw how it was so much more malleable material. It changes its state so easily. So it's kind of liquid to gas to solid. And that to me was like drawing. Woodwork is far less forgiving in a way. But if you're good at it, you can get around errors and make it even more beautiful. But so there's something else too. And I've also got this, right now, if you ask me what other job I'd like to do, it actually would be to work in a furniture school. I think right now would be a fantastic time to look at that world again through the notion of materials, technologies, and processes, but almost like beginning with a very mundane kind of position, of making chairs, and then just talking about that. I'm quite tempted at some stage to jump into that world, because I think that might be more provocative sometimes than where we are right now.
Okay, thank you very much, Carmen, Bob, Justin. Thank you for the audience. We wait you after lunch.
The lunch break will take place at the Barcelona Cathedral, just across the street, like the coffee break. After lunch break, the residents of Expo and Ciutat hotels are requested to pass by the secretariat desk because they have to sign some papers, please. Thank you.